Greetings once again, friends. My name is Peter, and this is Retro Unscripted. I thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope that you'll enjoy what's to come. This is episode 22, and this is going to cover my experience with the 8 and 16-bit generation from 1990 through 1995. If you saw episode 21, you'll remember that I condensed 18 years of gaming life into 10 minutes. I talked about my experience with arcades, with the Atari 2600, what little time I could spend with it. My experience with Commodore computers, the Commodore VIC-20 in 1984, and then the Commodore 64, I should say, in 1986. But things were changing behind the scenes in the late 1980s, as I was one of the only people in my class and one of the only people in my group of friends that had a Commodore computer. Everyone else had this thing called a Nintendo Entertainment System that I had heard of but didn't own. Friends out in Worcester had it, and I would play games like Top Gun, Super Mario Brothers, RBI Baseball, Track and Field, which of course one of my favorites. But I couldn't play because I was going to school, I wasn't working, I was focusing on graduating with honors, and living in a single-parent household, there just wasn't any way that I was going to get a Nintendo Entertainment System for myself. It just wasn't going to happen. Until Christmas of 1990. For Christmas of 1990, just prior, I took a look in the JCPenney catalog for Christmas, and I saw that there was a really decent deal on a Nintendo action set that had Super Mario 3 in it. And I proceeded to sit down in front of my family and make an impassioned case for why it was time for me to put the Commodore computers aside and to finally jump in with the NES. And my paternal grandmother, God rest her soul, she loved it and actually rewarded me with an NES for Christmas in 1990. I got 3 games that Christmas. I got Super Mario 3, obviously, which came with the game, or came with the system. I got Super C, which I'm still trying to re-add to my collection for a relatively decent price. And the first game that I played, which is Jeopardy! 25th Anniversary Edition. You're probably asking yourself, Peter, you could have played Super C, you could have played Super Mario 3. Why Jeopardy? It's really simple. At the time I was living with my paternal grandmother. I was in college after graduating high school. I was a music major, which was ridiculous, but that's a story for another time. But we had a routine, my grandmother and I, where every weeknight we would watch Jeopardy together, and we would kind of compete against each other to see who would answer more questions right or give more correct questions. So it made sense that this was one of the games that my grandmother got because she wanted me to practice and see if I could fare better than she did, because she consistently would answer questions better than I. And of course, getting this game, it really set the groundwork for my love of game show games in future years. I even did a Retro Unscripted episode on game show games, and you can see that in a link below. So this was the beginning of my 8-bit journey. I was already 5 years late. There were a lot of games for me to catch up on. I did the best that I could. Ninja Gaiden and Ninja Gaiden 2, Pinbot, the Super Mario games, obviously, the RBI games, Blades of Steel. I mean, I could go on and on. As a matter of fact, you can't see them because of the way the camera is, but just gazing in my collection, these are a lot of the games that I wanted to have, but simply because they were new and because they cost so much money, I didn't have in my library at that time. Interestingly enough, though, my 8-bit experience didn't last long alone, because of course 1990 leading to 1991 meant that the Super Nintendo was just around the corner. Now, I made the move to drop out of college in March of 1991, much to the behest of my family. The career path wasn't working. I was kind of frustrated with my living conditions. Living with my grandmother was difficult. And I got a really good job offer to work for the phone company as a long distance operator and move in with a couple of friends in Worcester that I had spent a lot of time with in the late 80s. So it was really a slam dunk for me. There was no way that I could say no. So upon moving out to Worcester with these friends and working for the phone company and having a steady income for the first time in my life, I was able to afford buying the Super Nintendo Entertainment System shortly after launch in the late summer, early fall of 1991. This was something that myself and a few friends, we all went to the same Toys R Us and we all bought Super Nintendos the same day. We each got different games, but some of us got games that were obviously overlapping. For example, everyone got Super Mario World because that's what came with the system. But my 3 unique games, and granted these games were expensive at the time, the first was F-Zero, this guy right here. F-Zero was great because it's something that we all trash talked about because we were all trying to set best lap times and best race times. And we would all get together and spend afternoons doing this kind of thing. So even though there wasn't any competitive racing simultaneous, it still was the basis of a lot of trash talking and bad mouthing back and forth in a friendly manner in late 1991, and something that I still think about happily to this day. Another game, and I did an entire episode on this, was Final Fantasy II, or Final Fantasy IV Easy Type in Japan. First RPG I ever played, first RPG I ever beat, still one of my favorite games of all time on any system, period. I know that some people argue that this game is a kind of a weak installment in the Final Fantasy series. I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. And I am biased, and I have no problem with admitting it. So that's Final Fantasy II, or 4, or whatever you want to call it. And in the third game, and I know that I still am thinking about doing a Pete Plays episode on this, is ActRaiser, this guy right here. ActRaiser is 1 part SimCity, 1 part action game. Now, I am not a SimCity fan at all. I can't stand those games, but for whatever reason, doing the simulation aspects in ActRaiser are okay. I can replay ActRaiser time and again, rebuild and tear down cities, and just have an absolute ball. I think the reason that I have an easier time playing this game is because there are action sequences to break it up. It's not just building and not just micromanagement. That happens for one half of the game, and the other half are action sequences and great music and huge boss battles. So those are the games that I got at launch. Of course, I went on to get John Madden Football. I would get Super Castlevania 4 not too long after. And it's very interesting because the Super Nintendo and the NES kind of were friends underneath my TV, and they would each get equal amounts of play. I kind of look at them, if you want to use a Toy Story reference, I kind of look at them as Woody and Buzz Lightyear. 2 good friends. I spent time with each of them. I thought both were cool, even though the 2 of them probably had weird conversations about which got played more. I don't really know where that comes from, but that's the impression that I get anyway. So the 8-bit and the 16-bit eras kind of bled over one into the other for me. And I didn't mind it. I was working. I was making a fairly decent income. I loved my job, even though the hours were a little weird. As far as how my life was going, life was great. I made a few dumb decisions here and there, as any 19, 20, 21 years of age will do. For example, when Street Fighter II came out for the Super Nintendo, I bought that because it was the last copy that I could find instead of paying my rent on time. I've since learned that that's not something that you do because rent is more important, but as a kid who was still new to this whole living on his own thing, it was just something that I did, and I really didn't regret it at the time, to be quite honest with you. And my friends didn't either. My roommates didn't either, in fact, as my roommate and I would play Street Fighter II well into the morning, or the early morning hours, and I usually got the best of them for what it's worth. Interestingly enough, Street Fighter II is also the second time that I got angry enough at a game to cause damage. Indoor Sports for the Commodore 64, if you saw episode 21, was the first, where I got so mad at the game that I bashed on my keyboard, sent my spacebar flying into the air, and forever had to click a little contact to get a space when I was typing instead of using a spacebar. Street Fighter 2 was the first time that I took a controller and literally threw it across the room until it broke because I could not beat Bison. That I'm a little ashamed of. I feel bad about it, and what's worse, I had to replace the controller the next day because I didn't have a controller, or a second controller, mind you. So I kind of learned my lesson at that point that breaking controllers or throwing cartridges, just not worth it. Scream out loud, swear, get up, stomp around the room, walk away, go outside. All of these are better options than breaking something, at least in my opinion. There is one more addition to the 16-bit era for me that happened in late 1992. I was visiting an independent video game store, like a buy-sell trade store in 1992, and I heard what sounded like a football game being played. And I know that it sounded like a football game because there was someone calling out the down and distance. There was someone calling the action on the field, and I didn't know what was going on. It turns out that the game was Sports Talk Football, or Sports Talk Football 93, starring Joe Montana. And I was just enraptured by the fact that there was commentary in a sports video game. This blew me away. For years and years, going back to when I was playing hardball on the Commodore, any kind of commentary was supplied by me. So the fact that there was, me doing it in front of the system. So having someone actually calling it out as a compliment to the gameplay was just fantastic. And I had to have the game. So sure enough, I bought the Genesis with this. And I also got Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And that was the beginning of my Genesis phase. So I went from having no consoles before Christmas Day of 1990 to having 3 consoles in my library by 1993. And that number continued to increase. A little bit later in 1993, I found a good deal on a used TurboGrafx 16 CD system, which I bought. And I also bought the Super System card for it, so that basically turned it into a Turbo Duo. So I wound up playing games like Lords of Thunder and Bomberman and Air Zonk. And suddenly it was very difficult to balance equal time to 4 consoles, and it was getting to be costly to keep new games coming for all 4. Unfortunately, in 1994, the House of Cards came crashing down. I was laid off from the phone company, the office closed, and I was forced to move back in with my grandmother because I was homeless. My roommates relocated. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't find another place to live, and I was basically starting back at square one. 1994 is when I started to actively trade in games that I had to be able to afford to buy new games, something that I still do to this day. It becomes very difficult when you're a video game player or a video game fan and you're not working, or you don't make a lot of money and you have to make difficult choices as to what game or games that you want. So I wound up making myself 2 lists, a list of games that I was playing constantly, and then a list of games that I was playing kind of or not at all. And the games that I wasn't really playing that much were basically trade bait, and I would trade those in to stay current on the systems that I had. And then it became difficult to keep up on the systems that I had, so I wound up trading those away one by one. I traded away my TurboGrafx for a copy of Secret of Mana and a couple of other games. I traded away my NES for some Super Nintendo games because my NES wasn't getting a lot of play. And I started to learn at that point, and as I reflect on it now, 20 years later, it's a very difficult decision to make because sometimes you're not able to get these games back. You trade away games kind of with the premise that if you really want them back, you'll have time to rebuy them. Hopefully circumstances in your life will be better. You'll have a better job. You'll have more money set aside So you'll be able to replace these games. Granted, you'll have to pay for them again, but at least you'll be able to get them again. But as I look at my retro library, my library of games, or the systems that I have, it's not the case. Replacing a TurboGrafx 16 today is expensive. Replacing a TurboGrafx 16 CD is even more expensive. It took the generosity of an online friend for me to be able to get a Nintendo Entertainment System back because I'm in school and not working. It's taken generosity to be able to get the systems that I do have. I did buy the Genesis on my own. I bought the PlayStation 2 on my own. But the Nintendo 64 was a gift. The GameCube was a gift. The Nintendo Entertainment System was a gift. So it's been difficult now as it was back then. And I've wound up trading away games from last generation 360 and PS3 games to bolster my retro library. And it's the nature of the beast. But it's something that you do regret over time, and something that I'm not necessarily proud of. And you'll see in episode 23 that I made probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life as far as trading stuff away, but we'll get to that next time. In 1995, thankfully, life rebounded. I was able to get another job. I was working at a fastener company as an office worker, so I had income coming back in. I was able to get back into buying and playing games again. I was feeling better about myself. And even as far as video game retail goes, one of my favorite independent stores was expanding and opening a new location that I got to help remodel and get ready to open. And I got invited to the grand opening night. And it was really cool because he had a Killer Instinct machine in there. He had a Street Fighter Alpha 2 machine in there that you could play as long as you had quarters. He had refreshments. And perhaps the most interesting part of that night was that he had something called an import PlayStation, which I had kind of heard of in EGM and other magazines, but I really didn't know a lot about. So he set me up on this import PlayStation. He put in this game that I'd never heard of called Ridge Racer. And it was by Namco, and I really didn't know what to expect. I'm like, it's a racing game? It's like, just try it, he said. And I did. For an hour. Even though the game has only one track. I played for an hour, and I loved every second of it. And I knew at that point that the 8 and 16-bit eras that I had been enjoying up to that point were rapidly coming to an end, and that the 32-bit generation was just around the corner. I knew that I had to get the money set aside to be able to get a PlayStation. I knew that I had to have one at launch. And the way that it happened, and what happened next, will be covered in episode 23. I hope that you'll join me then, friends. As always, I do thank you guys very much for watching Retro Unscripted, and I hope that you enjoy watching and listening as much as I enjoy taping and sharing with you. Until the next time, friends, thank you for watching Retro Unscripted. Take care.